I woke up to the sound of something that didn't belong in my yard, the high, angry whir of hedge trimmers, the kind of noise that makes you sit bolt upright even before you remember where you are. And when I looked out the kitchen window, there they were, 3 men in orange vests moving through my fence line like they were harvesting somebody's property, and right behind them, Margot Reed, smiling like she'd won a prize. That was the morning my privacy got cut down to a pile of clippings, and that was the morning I decided I would not let that be the end of the story. My name is Sam Hollis. I live on a little cul-de-sac called Willow Bend. Small houses, tidy lawns, mailboxes with flags that never stay up, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other and keep to themselves until something ugly happens, and then suddenly everyone has an opinion. I've been tending those hedges for 20 years. They were not just shrubs to me. They were where my wife and I would sit on Sunday mornings with coffee, where our kids learned to spot cardinals, where I learned patience. Margot and her HOA, they have a different vocabulary. Uniform, tidy, compliant. Their rulebook reads like a manual for erasing personality. It started small, like most fights. A polite note slipped under the door. Violation. Hedge exceeds height. Fine, I thought. I'll trim. I trimmed. Then a certified letter. Then a $50 per day fine. The numbers were petty, but their tone was not. Thinly veiled ownership, a power trip delivered in Times New Roman. I tried to talk to Margot. I kept it calm. I kept it neighborly, but she smiled like a woman who'd rehearsed the exact inflection she needed to end a conversation before it began. Community standards, she said. We all have to follow the rules, she said. Behind her was the board of the HOA, like a chorus of nodding heads. What they wanted was control, and when control fails on niceties, it moves to force. When they sent the landscapers, they didn't just prune. They tore the hedges down to stubs, like a haircut with malice. I stood there in my slippers while my life was being reduced to mulch. The men kept working, polite but distant, and Margot kept watching. She crossed her arms and said, like it was a victory announcement, "That should do it." I remember feeling hollow, but there was this other thing, a slow, tight heat in my chest that steadied me. I could be angry and nothing would change. Or I could do something that would make the point clear. I spent nights reading county codes and HOA covenants. The dry, bureaucratic language became my late-night coffee. There are always seams in those documents, places where city rules and private covenants don't line up perfectly, and when you look long enough you find the places a person can step through. I found one. Masonry walls are regulated differently, and while the HOA liked to say landscaping controlled everything, the city code had a say about permanent structures. It was not an automatic win, far from it, but it was a crack. The wall idea grew like a plan whispered between two stubborn people, me, and a small inner voice that liked to win the fights that mattered. I could have hired the whole job out. It would have been faster, cleaner, less exhausting. But the idea of strangers building my defense felt wrong. So I learned. I learned how to mix concrete, how to level, how to stagger cinder blocks so they'd look like the thing they had to be: functional, solid, unpretentious. I hauled blocks in the back of my truck. I got dirt under my nails. I learned to read a level like it was a small, merciful truth. The neighbors watched. Some smiled. Some shook their heads. One elderly man down the street brought me a thermos of coffee and said, quiet as dust, "You doing okay, Sam?" I did not answer him the way he expected. I waved, because waves are simpler than explanations. When Margot found out I was building, she turned up the heat. Letters multiplied like bad weather. Cease and desist, one read. You are creating a non-conforming structure, another said. The HOA president sent an email that managed to be condescending and threatening in a single paragraph. At the next meeting, she stood up and read a prepared statement, her voice smooth, her eyes sharper than the paper. We can't allow exceptions, she said. The room clapped politely. People who didn't want to be noticed clapped anyway. The board voted to pursue enforcement. It was a theatrical performance, with Margot clearly cast as the guardian of order, but the stakes felt real for me, not just fines, but the principle of whether a person could keep a part of their life from being legislated away by a group that had decided uniformity was a virtue. There was a confrontation I still think about. Margot came to the sidewalk like she was stepping into a courtroom. She wore a tailored jacket and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sam, she said, you know we can make you remove that if we decide it's not allowed. Why escalate this? I looked at the half-built wall and then at her, and in a voice that surprised me with its calmness I said, Because it's not about blocks, Margot. It's about whether I get to keep a bit of the life I built. She laughed, a quick, brittle thing. Life? It's a hedge, she said. You're making it personal. She didn't know how personal it had become. Maybe she never would. The city inspector's visit felt like the center of a storm. I had every receipt laid out, photos of footings, batch numbers for concrete, a small binder of things that matter when someone's house becomes a subject of a fight. Dates, times, names, stubborn evidence. Margot arrived with 2 board members and the smugness of people who write rules for others to obey. The inspector walked slowly, asked questions, scribbled on a clipboard. For a long while, nobody spoke. I felt like I was watching a slow-burn film, and all I could do was breathe and let the scene play out. Then the inspector looked up and said, "Documentation sound." No immediate order. It was not an absolute victory, it was the kind of small, decisive mercy that sometimes stands between despair and further escalation. Margot's shoulders tightened, a little fissure opened in her composure. That fissure widened in public ways. People started talking to me differently. Some neighbors admitted they'd thought the HOA was being fair, until they realized what the rules were actually for, not preserving beauty, but preserving a certain kind of control. Others stayed loyal to Margot, to the idea that chaos must be kept in check. Social media lit up with snapshots. My wall, the trimmed hedges, the certified letters. Opinions poured in, as they do, loud, righteous, ambivalent. I read them all because I wanted to know what this fight looked like to people who didn't live it. Some called me stubborn, others called me brave. Labels never tell the whole story. In the weeks after the inspection, things settled into a tense quiet. Margot tried a couple of underhanded moves, anonymous complaints to city departments, a rumor about safety hazards. She floated like a pebble into a pond to watch the ripples. I answered with paperwork and patience. I fixed the things that needed fixing, not because I wanted to be compliant, but because meticulousness is a kind of resistance. Building the wall changed something in me. I found a reserve of stubbornness I didn't know I had, and behind that a quieter thing, a confidence that if you do the small, honest things right, sometimes the machinery of power grinds against you and doesn't win. The finished wall stood up like an answer. It was not pretty in any showy sense. It was practical, rough around the edges, and exactly what I needed it to be. A boundary, a statement, a place where my mornings could start again without the noise of strangers cutting away what made my yard mine. People passed by and nodded. Some frowned. Margot came once, looked at it, and said nothing. Her silence felt like an admission of sorts, or maybe just an unwillingness to concede. Either way, it changed the neighborhood conversation. The HOA didn't dissolve. Margot kept her title. But the dynamic shifted. What had been a steamroller of enforcement now had to be a little more cautious when it came down to making people into examples. I don't tell this story to celebrate my stubbornness, or to pretend I won some grand moral victory. I tell it because it felt important to hold on to a small corner of normal in a town that prefers sanitized sameness. There are things that people in power will call rules, and then there are things that are really about pride and territory and the pleasure of telling somebody else what they can or cannot have. This was a small fight with a neighbor, but it was also a test of whether the little, ordinary parts of our lives are negotiable, or whether they can be taken piece by piece until nothing that makes a home personal remains. So what do you think? Was I right to build that wall, or did I escalate something that could have been solved with a conversation? Is the HOA protecting the neighborhood or policing people's lives? Drop your thoughts below. Tell me if you'd stand up, or if you'd give in, or if you've been in a fight that looked small but felt huge. Share this with someone who likes a good neighborhood drama. And if you think rules should be fairer or stricter, say why. I want to hear the messy, honest takes, because the only thing this story needs more than anything is more voices.